But a change to format this morning because she is a very busy politician this morning, as one might expect, in the wake of yesterday's budget. We are joined immediately by Nicola Willis, the National Party's finance spokesperson and deputy leader, who has been busy, I imagine, reading lines of figures and policy announcements that came out in the budget yesterday. Nicola, thank you very much indeed for joining us so early in the morning.
Hey, great to be on the show and looking forward to talking with you about this blowout of a budget.
Now, you calling it, everyone's looking always for the catch cry, the blowout budget. Why do you say that?
Well, because spending has blown out beyond even what the government was talking about 6 months ago, which means that borrowing and deficits has blown out, which means that New Zealand's debt has blown out. And all of those things together spell bad news for people. One, because it puts more pressure on inflation and price rises. Two, because it means interest rates will stay higher for longer. And three, because it means that we will take a lot longer to pay off New Zealand's debt, and the interest bills on that debt are now getting so high that it will be the fourth biggest piece of expenditure after welfare, health and education.
Yeah, because we now look, what is the debt or sovereign debt to GDP ratio now, or projected to be?
Well, it's going to get up to just about 20% on the new measure that Grant Robertson likes to use. But I think the number that's more meaningful for people to understand is that before COVID, New Zealand's debt was less than $10 billion. That's now going to blow out to more than $90 billion. So 9 times as much debt in real terms. And I think when you think about it that way, rather than as percentages, it's pretty clear the enormity of the huge borrowing New Zealand's been doing as a country. And we do need to be conscious when we're borrowing $1 that our kids and grandkids are going to end up having to pay it back. So we owe it to them to ensure that every dollar we're borrowing, we can look people in the eye and say that is actually going to drive the productivity of the economy. It's going to make us a stronger country. And my fear is that this is a government who is spraying a lot of money around. They've got that money hose. They're not using it very carefully, and so I don't think that they can make that pledge that every dollar is being spent as wisely as it could be.
All right, I've got to say, other commentators, perhaps less politically involved, Nicola, have said it's not the splurgiest election year budget they've ever seen. It actually isn't a lolly scramble.
Well, what I measure it by is this. Just 6 months ago, Grant Robertson was saying that he would spend a certain amount in this budget. And since then, we've seen inflation remain stubbornly high. We've seen the Reserve Bank continue to be concerned that they're going to have to keep lifting interest rates. So I thought that the response to all of that from the government would be to go, maybe we'll trim the sails a bit and reduce the spending a bit. Instead, they've taken the opposite approach, which is that Grant has spent more additional money than he'd committed he would. And so when I look at that, I just say, well, maybe there were opportunities to cut a bit more cloth in other places. And my concern is that at some point we do have to get the spending under control. There's been a pattern of delaying the return to books that are balanced. There's been a pattern of delaying reduction in spending. And we're still in a situation where your everyday worker is getting taxed more because inflation's pushed them into higher tax brackets. So it's not sustainable in the medium term to keep doing that.
Oh, yeah, but mums and kids will be happy. Well, parents will be happy. There's more childhood education subsidy here. There's more chance to pay you or make it easier to pay your winter power bills. Surely that's good for the person in the street, for the average Kiwi.
Well, I suppose if you have a child who's 2 or a child who may be 2 in the future, it's okay, but that's a very narrow group of people. We prefer our policy approach, which is to say that families with young children become eligible for a tax rebate of up to $75 a week for their childcare costs, and that applies no matter what age your child under 5 is. And that money goes direct into your bank account rather than first having to go through the government transfer and subsidy system. So we think that's a cleaner, more effective approach. And overnight, I've already had emails from a range of early childhood education providers saying they're actually pretty concerned with the way the government's designing that 20 hours policy because of the impact it might have on their centres and their ability to offer quality care. So I'm not sure that's thought through in the best way. And I think what New Zealanders also realise is, the government can always come up with new ways to spend your money. Of course they can. But ultimately what we look to them to do is to manage the economy really responsibly so that we are encouraging people to invest, to get ahead, to grow the economy, so that the government's own activity isn't putting pressure on inflation, isn't driving interest rates higher. And by those tests, this budget doesn't meet the mark. We're effectively going to see hard-working taxpayers paying more tax. We're going to see more pressure on inflation. We're going to see, I think, next week, the Reserve Bank being forced to stick with pretty high interest rates.
Yeah, that is widely predicted. What about the new tax on trusts?
Now, this is an interesting one because the case that David Parker put up yesterday is he said he has analysis which shows that the difference between the trust rate and the top tax rate has led to some people avoiding their tax obligations. Now, I don't want people avoiding their tax obligations. So I'm going to have a really careful look at his evidence because I think it would be wrong for me just to accept at face value that argument because this is the same tax minister who proposed a tax on KiwiSaver would be the fair thing to do, and I didn't agree with that. So, look, National's going to be pretty responsible on this one. We're going to look over the detail of the analysis. We're going to listen to the submissions at Select Committee before we rush to judgment on what should happen with that tax rate.
All right, is that suggesting you are going to rush to judgment at some stage?
No, it's just suggesting that we need to look at the analysis before we decide whether we support that increase or whether we oppose it. At the moment, we've had very scant detail, and so we need to analyse it properly.
All right. You kicked off the interview this morning, the response to the Budget 2023, by talking about debt and government debt. Can we get a commitment out of you this morning that a national government or you as a National Minister of Finance or as a Minister of Finance would not increase debt as a percentage of GDP in your term in office?
Well, here is the thing, Sean. I would love to say to you, absolute guarantee, no way. But the whole reason that we try and keep debt low is because of the rainy days, the shocks that come along that I can't predict right now. If Bill English had made a commitment back in 2008 that debt would always be lower, how could he possibly have responded effectively?
So you're criticising them for something which you reserve the right to do yourself?
No, what I think right now is that this is the time where the government needs to be very careful that it's not adding excessive pressure to the debt because we do need to be paying it down so that we have room to move if there is another national disaster, if there is another global financial crisis. And my concern is that some of the dollars they are borrowing can't be justified given the impact that has on interest costs, given the impact that has on inflation and interest rates. So the balancing act here is making sure that we create some buffers so that we can take debt in the future if we really have to. But you shouldn't take debt on unless you really have to.
All right. Look, finally, in every budget, there's something that just seems crazy or laughable by way of measure of expenditure. Have you found that little gem yet?
Yeah, here's a good one for you. So you might remember that Chris Hipkins had this ludicrous idea that he would merge all the regional polytechs into one big mega entity.
Yeah.
That was called T2king.
That worked out well.
Yep, he said, that was going to save lots of money. Well, so far it has cost literally hundreds of millions of dollars, and the regions that I talk to say that the education being provided as a result is actually less responsive than it was. Well, in the budget, they're already having to bail out the new mega entity. They're proposing to give it a loan, a $200 million loan, so that it can sort itself out. And if that's not a disaster after only a year of operation, I don't know what is. And I think it reflects very poorly on the Prime Minister and his decision-making. He was the one who said that merger would work. If they're already having to be bailed out, it's clearly not working.
Nicola, I thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. I know you'll have a busy morning doing the media rounds. Thank you for your budget reaction. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you, Sean. Have a great day.
Cheers. That is Nicola Willis, the National Party Finance spokesperson and Deputy Leader of the National Party. Would she be, and actually that's a question, I didn't stick it on here, but I will ask David Seymour next time we talk to him if he wants to be the Finance Minister. So there we go, some initial reaction to the budget. And look, I do not know how useful it is for me to get into specific figures with you. But it is a budget that does not look overly profligate. But it does require, to get us through the tough times ahead, the government is borrowing more money. And can we afford to? It means that we'll be in debt for longer. Interest rates will stay high for longer. Some relief there if you've got, or you're going to have a 2-year-old, what you want to send to early childhood education. Some relief for those who are doing it hard in terms of winter heating. A nod towards class warfare with the new 39% trust income or tax rate for trusts in line with the new top personal tax rate. But I got to say, bugger all else. Didn't send me rigid, as they would say, at all.